I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do.
It's a chilling story proving life can be stranger than fiction.
This story reads like the plot of a bad horror movie, except this is real. And the victim, believe it or not, was a horror film director.
Macabre death, UFO docudrama.
The mystery.
Horror movie director ends up in a horror movie scenario. I just couldn't believe it.
Al Adamson. Like, who was this guy? First kisses can be life-altering. For horror fans, that first kiss is a scary movie we saw as kids that made such a big impact on us that it made us lifelong fans of the genre. It didn't matter if the movie wasn't the greatest in quality. Something about it sparked passion within us. And for some of us, that passion compelled us to become creators ourselves. The heyday of the drive-in theater was a unique moment in movie history. Maverick independent filmmakers could make very cheap exploitation movies very quickly and find a market for them across the country. Low-budget legends were born, with names like David L. Friedman, Ray Dennis Steckler, Burt I. Gordon, Ted V. Michaels, and Herschel Gordon Lewis. And then there was another director and producer named Al Adamson, who made some of the cheapest and the craziest exploitation films of that era. He made over 30 movies that included westerns, horror films, biker films, softcore sex comedies, and martial arts films. And truth be told, some of those movies, all of those things were included in the same film. Adamson is a cult figure who rarely gets discussed, strangely enough, but a new documentary by director David Gregory of Severin Films may change all of that. Blood and Flesh, the real life and ghastly death of Al Adamson, just had its U.S. premiere at Beyond Fest in Los Angeles on September 28th. My guests today are David Gregory, the film's director, and producer Heather Buckley. David and Heather, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. I was so happy to see this documentary. I was there for the opening night, and I loved how you introduced the movie. You came on stage, and you said that you had seen your first Al Adamson movie when you were 11, correct?
Correct, yeah. Dracula versus Frankenstein.
Dracula versus Frankenstein.
On tape, on Betamax tape. And it was rented by myself and Carl Daft, who's still my partner in Severin Films. And we did our horror education together. And that was one of the first films we rented. And to us, at that age, you don't notice the certain things that are rough around the edges. I mean, around the same time, we rented The Omen, for example, which we also loved, or Frank Langella in Dracula, and loved them all. But we didn't look at Dracula versus Frankenstein and think, oh, this is low budget. We looked at it and thought, well, it's got monsters. It's got all the elements that we really enjoy. It's got blood. It's got a carnival. It's got everything that you would need. But there was something just very strange about it. And that strangeness has to do with the low budget and the creative choices that were made specifically with Dracula and Frankenstein.
Yeah, the look of Frankenstein is not your traditional Frankenstein, and the sound, the audio, the voice of Dracula is rather different than what people are normally used to. And it's somewhat surreal because of that from first viewing. Was Dracula versus Frankenstein your first kiss? And I usually call the first kiss the movie that got you down this road to ruin of staying with
No, my first would be King Kong, the one with Jessica Lange and Jeff Bridges. I was taken to see that by my parents when I was about 4 years old. And that changed everything for me.
I saw that in the theater as well. I was a little bit older, and I almost threw up when Charles Grodin got stepped on and the foot started to move away.
You see, I love that. I cried when Kong died, and I yelled out in the theater, "He was my friend." And everybody burst out laughing, and I think I was traumatized after that. You people don't understand.
No, David, you're right. He's our friend.
Yeah, he is our friend. So is Frankenstein, which I think is one of the great appeals of Frankenstein. And one of the weird things about this Frankenstein, he's not necessarily have that empathy that you normally see with something like Karloff, which I think made him a little bit more frightening in this version. It interests me talking about Al Adamson's films, and I'm assuming from there you just got a taste of him, and as you grew up, you started really taking a look at his career. Why I think that that's interesting is I take a look at your career, starting out working with Blue Underground UK, co-founder of that, and then moving on to Severin, and it was an Arrow?
It was Anchor Bay and then Blue Underground US. I was with working with Bill Lustig for Anchor Bay for a couple of years, and then he formed Blue Underground US, and I was with him for the first 4 years of that.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that you seem to always have this passion for saving the lost soul. So you restore all these controversial films. I mean, you have stuff from Jess Franco, like Bloody Moon, which I got your disc of that, and I love the interview with Jess Franco where he's like, listen, we were just having fun.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Doing the best
Another
we could.
film that me and Carl rented when we were about 11 on tape. And that was the day that we rented Bloody Moon was the same day that we first saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and so it was a very special day. We had to pretend that we were sitting in our living room playing chess in case our parents walked in on any particular moment in Bloody Moon or Chainsaw.
This was in England?
This was in England, yeah.
How edited was
they were both uncut at that time because it was before the video nasties. It was very soon after that the films started to get banned. So we just got in before the films got banned when we first got a VHS player and a Betamax player and started renting everything we could, and then those pleasures were taken away from us cruelly by the establishment.
Which may be why you've gone down the path that you have.
Yeah, I mean, we were dealing in illegal tapes when we were still in high school because we were trading them with people up and down the country through written letters through fanzines and stuff like that, because it was the only way you could get this stuff.
The horror version of Braveheart, renegade pipes playing renegade music. Well, it's interesting because you had a very eclectic group of films as well. It's not just that you went for grindhouse films and things. You also had like The Changeling, Peter Medak's The Changeling.
He was at the screening the other night. Peter was. Actually.
Was he?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness, I would have loved to have seen him. But you also had, Nicholas Roeg's Don't Look Now, which you may not know, but that's my first kiss. I saw it when I was 8, when I really shouldn't have.
Yeah. Although that's not a Severin title, that's one that we just produced the special features for, which we still do for companies like Second Sight and other companies. And yeah, we did that featurette on Don't Look Now like 15 years ago now, but I think it's also on the Criterion disc and various others.
So one of the things that I think is interesting is that you seem to fall in love with these lost souls and your own expression of art, where you're as a documentarian at this point making full-length documentaries, seem to do the same thing. You have Lost Souls, A Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau, which is masterful. And now the new film, Blood and Flesh. Both of these are looking at people who are kind of forgotten. I mean, who would have thought, in fact, I was stunned, who would have thought that a documentary about a bloated Hollywood failure, this remake that no one liked to look at except to laugh at, would be something that I would be so engrossed with, that there's a backstory that's so amazing to it. And the same thing with Al Adamson. I mean, Al is one of those guys that even at something like Cinema Wasteland, which I'm heading to, there are ardent Al Adamson people and there are ardent Al Adamson detractors saying, you've got to be kidding me, these movies are absolute tripe. But you found a way to not only look at those films from a curious eye of a fan, but you also had the wherewithal to discover the weirdness of both of these stories. What do you think is the passion that drives what you look at as something that you want to devote years of your time to?
It has to be something special that's beyond just a featurette on a disc, which obviously we do a lot of, and we put a lot of care into. I mean, we still, give the same amount of care to the featurettes that we did when I first started making these things in 2000. But in this case, it was something where I did the first interview, and I was immediately just started thinking during that interview that there is more to this story. This story needs to be told in depth from multiple perspectives, and it's not just, of course, because it has such a grisly and lurid ending, although that it is a part of it, yeah. But also when names like Bud Cardos and Marilyn Joy and Gary Kent and Russ Tamblyn and all these incredible characters who have rich histories of their own in independent filmmaking You think if you can get these kinds of people to give their perspective, then all of a sudden you've got something that's going to be a vast tapestry, a vast look into how independent films were made. And these are true independent films. I mean, people often think of indie film as something that's associated with, Sundance and art theaters and things like that. But these people were using their own money, or Al and Sam were using their own money to go out and make films that they could get into drive-ins and they could exploit no matter what. And they didn't have a lot of money, so they had to use creativity and resources and the right people, the right crew of people to go out and make something that was actually marketable.
And the drive seemed very humble, right? Because it was, Al says in the doc, it's like we made these things just to entertain, not for the critics.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a mindset that is a certain type of person that's been really with cinema since the very beginning. I mean, the second and third movies after The Kiss were basically exploitation, silent films of strippers on poles.
Well, even Al's dad, Denver Dixon, was one of the first independent distributors. He made rip-off cowboy movies. He ripped off Tom Mix, and he created a character called Art Mix and was able to kind of trick people into thinking they were seeing a Tom Mix cowboy movie, but it wasn't. It was like a very low budget version that he was making himself and bicycling around the country. I mean, this guy had cars all over the country so he could sleep in them, when he went to certain areas and things like that. I mean, he was true independent.
Well, I think there's always a strange inventiveness that makes for great storytelling, like Kroger Bab in the 40s, guys that are basically pitching tents at the edge of town to show their lurid films, the white lab coat films, and then moving on to the 50s and, all of those folks. And then you have in the 60s, really, where people like Al Adamson and Ray Dennis Steckler are making these movies that play in drive-ins, maybe even under multiple names, and you were able to track down some of that.
No, absolutely. The people who operate outside the system that people know, that the general public know as what cinema is always very interesting to me. And there's plenty of them. And of course, they had to get creative in order to get their films seen and in order to find their audience.
Yes. And Heather, I know you as a producer of the Glass Eye picks, Jen Wexler's The Ranger, but you have many other credits, to say the least, in like a 4-year or 5-year period. You have, 163 credits of producer under your belt of multiple special features?
This is correct.
Yeah. So just to give people a little bit of an idea, from Army of Darkness to The Long Riders, which is pretty amazing right there. There's probably great stories about that. John Carpenter's The Thing, 8 Million Ways to Die. And I think it was mentioned that the documentary started as a special feature was it for a book? Or?
No, it was for, I think it was for Carnival Magic, basically. That was the first film that we got the rights to distribute. And I think it was Carnival Magic. But anyway, I just did an interview with David Conno, who did the book Schlockerama about Al Adamson, and it was that was the interview I was doing, where I was like, need to get all these people while they're still around.
Did you come in, Heather, at that point and say, here we go, and then it became something bigger?
I think it was 7 interviews in out of all the interviews that we see in the doc, but anytime David asks me for anything, I'm there for David. So he just said, will you produce this? And it's like, yes. Because
we had so many people that were on the wish list. And a lot of them were, it's not like a lot of the featurettes we do where you can just go to IMDb Pro and find out how to get in touch with them. A lot of these people are out of the industry, or were never in the industry in the first place, or just, flirted with it for one film or something like that. So there was a huge list of people. Sam Sherman gave us a lot of phone numbers, some of them hadn't been used in years, so we didn't know if they were current. And so it was going to be a lot of legwork to basically find these people. And of course, a lot of them were not in Los Angeles either, so we needed to figure out ways to shoot people who were in various parts of the country, and one of them in Australia and things like that. So, but then of course there was the true crime part of it. They weren't film people at all. They were police people and Al's housekeeper and people that, were not easy to find. And that was a lot of what Heather was charged with.
And did you know a lot, Heather, about Al Adamson before this?
I didn't know too much about him. I knew about Dracula versus Frankenstein. And to go back to what David said, it's like I have a knack in my producing to try to find these people in ways, if like you're off the grid, how to circle them. But it was the true crime part, which I had to learn how to be a true crime producer. to go out there because if these people are off the grid, the talent, the detectives, they're not able to be found.
Right.
And then I was able to get to one guy, Enrique, and he's the one that gathered the full team together that was part of the manhunt and part of the investigation around Al's death.
Yeah, manhunt. I love that term. What was the biggest differentiator between a normal interview of, say, you're trying to get Russ Tamblyn and then talking to these detectives?
It's very interesting because it might have been different on the ground. David was different on the ground interviewing the detectives.
Just that they weren't used to being on camera so much, you know. But in a way that was good because they're just talking as law enforcement people. They have to talk in facts. You know, I can't get them to give a kind of flowery personal viewpoint of what happened. They have to talk in what actually went down and could go into their report and was a matter of record. But in that way, you were able to get like a very clean version of what happened from the police's perspective.
I would say, unlike when dealing with the sort of actors, is that for all the detectives, I did a pre-interview because I was also trying to do fact-finding of like, what do we have to go out when it comes to evidence? Who else was involved? What was their role? So there was research more when I got them on the phone, but they were all very open and they wanted to participate in the doc, which I'm very grateful to.
That's great. See, that would have been my first thought, is that you must have had a need for a lot of perseverance, because I would think that they'd be standoffish to want to talk about something that went through the legal system in such a way they don't really know what's going to happen once it becomes part of a documentary.
The only person we really got a no from was the judge, and I think because the case is it's probably still ongoing in some sort of way, because I think maybe they could go and get a
we're still up for
the
parole every
yeah,
few
so
years.
I think if they're up for parole, the judge is not supposed to talk about it, which is my conjecture on the issue. But that's the only person that.
There was also the prosecutor as well. I don't know if we ever actually spoke to him, but
I don't think we could find him.
Yeah,
prosecutor.
Because Enrique we did hire him as a private detective to gather all these folks together.
So one of the things about Al Adamson, he's done a lot of movies. People have probably seen his work and they don't even know it, but I can go to something like Cinema Wasteland, and I would say 70% of the people there have never heard the name Al Adamson. So for the sake of the people who are listening, can you give a brief overview of Al Adamson's work?
Yeah, and I will add to that. It's been surprising to me in the various festivals that I've been to how many people at genre festivals were not familiar with Al Adamson. And it is probably because he worked in so many different genres. He wasn't just known for his horror films. He did several horror films, aside from Dracula vs. Frankenstein. He did Blood of Dracula's Castle and Nurse Sherry. But he also is known for his biker movies like Hell's Bloody Devils and Satan's Sadists, and his sexploitation films like The Naughty Stewardesses and Cinderella 2000. And several westerns, like his first film was Halfway to Hell and then Five Bloody Graves. And so he was jumping from genre to genre, basically figuring out what was the latest thing. He went through a period of making blaxploitation movies like Black Heat and Black Samurai. And so there's a lot of variation in these films, but he always went back to the people that he could rely on. And early on in his career, that was people like directors of photography, Vilmos Zsigmond and Laszlo Kovacs, who obviously went on to incredible careers. Gary Graver was his most regular director of photography, who also worked with Orson Welles and had an incredible career in exploitation films. And then the stuntmen like Bud Cardos and Gary Kent, the various actors. But the other thing was that he liked to do was get old Hollywood people in his films. So they were name Hollywood stars, but like 20 or 30 years earlier. And so he would get them, right as they were on their way out, as someone puts it in the documentary. But Al was making movies from the early 60s through to the early 80s. And in the 70s, he was incredibly prolific. He was making like 3 films a year. So he was he was just, out to the desert. This is the idea. Let's get some film. Let's shoot. These are the people we're going to involve. Let's do it. Boom. And in the case of Girls for Rent, the sexploitation film he made with Georgina Spelvin, that was something like 8 weeks from the idea to when it was actually in the theater. So it's like they did these things very quickly.
And he seemed to like leave no chicken on the bone, to say the least.
Right.
There were a couple movies, if I remember correctly, that like had this thing with Marine World.
Yes. So that was a good example. They would use whatever resources they could, and that was originally a movie called The Fakers, which was kind of a James Bond type movie. And they actually went to Marine World in San Diego, which is now SeaWorld, and just shot there on the fly without permits or anything like that, and just shot chase scenes and running around with a gun. And but that movie never came out as The Fakers, as far as I could tell, because nobody wanted it. So they went back and shot a bunch of biker scenes and cut in a subplot about bikers and made it into a biker movie called Hell's Bloody Devils.
And you would think that since he's not known, that maybe he was not successful like Ed Wood, but he really was successful.
He was successful. He was actually quite a shrewd business person. Him and Sam both were, and obviously being not paying out too much in making his movies, they were actually able to deliver them so cheaply into the theaters that as long as they got distribution, which the first few films didn't, he struggled to get his career off the ground in the beginning. But it seems like Satan's Sadists things turned around, and he actually got a lot better at what he was doing and figured out who he could rely on and those kinds of things. He actually did pretty well, and he invested a lot in real estate while he was all through the 70s, and so he actually had quite a lot of property by the time he retired.
What was interesting about the distribution in the doc is that you had multiple chances to submit a film. There you go, this doesn't work. It's like, we'll submit it again with all the extra material, which is wild.
Yeah, they revised their movies several times in terms of, shooting new footage to make it into a new movie. And then, of course, they'd release it under one title. And then if there was another opportunity, they'd release it under another title. I
think that's what was really interesting about the documentary, certain things that I didn't know. Like, I kind of knew that he was extremely cheap, that he didn't pay a lot of the people who were in his movies, and yet they were loyal to come back to the next one. But even though he was doing one-shots, it was this thing where it destroys the auteur theory completely, because he would sit there and rework his films again and again. While we put this out, it was a spy film. That doesn't work anymore. Nobody cares about spy films. Now it's a biker film. Yeah. Now there's monsters in it.
Well, look at all the directors, all the A-list directors that revisit their old films. We just do this now, and the idea of having the independent film family, you work together over and over again, and you hire sort of your favorite character actors to be in it. It happens today.
Yeah, no one called Robert Altman unimaginative because he had a troupe of people.
Or Rob Zombie in the way that he casts his films currently, or Tarantino. They're doing the same thing.
Well, as Fred Olen Ray says in the movie, when you're making films on the fly for low budget, you need to bring in the people that you can rely on, that you've worked with before. So there's a shortcut, there's a shorthand, and Ed Wood had a stock company, as did Ray Dennis Steckler, as did Ted B. Michaels.
Well, you had Ray Dennis Steckler, kind of an allusion to him in the documentary.
It's Fred that says that.
Yeah, because we also have, you mentioned Gary Kent, you mentioned Bud Cardos, and they both worked with Steckler. And so they had this, I believe, in a documentary that was done for Gary Kent, Love and Other Stunts.
I think it's called Danger God now. They've changed the
title. Oh, really? They changed the name to Danger God? That's funny. Yeah. Perfect. It goes with the Al Adamson thing, change the name and become something that's going to work. But yeah, they talked about how Ray would just give them the semblance of a plot and then say, yeah, you're a drug dealer. Here's your briefcase. Now punch her in the stomach or do something to get out of the room. What was the thing that Heather and both of you can answer this? What was your favorite story of a movie that went through an evolution? It started as one thing and it ended up another, because there are certain things that they did, like, obviously people halfway through the movie go, I've seen this film before. And yet there were just few minor deviations, maybe even just the title. But what was the one that made you laugh out loud?
Well, I think it would have to be Blood of Ghastly Horror, which was formerly Psycho a Go-Go, which was formerly Echo of Terror. I mean, because that just went in such a different direction from what it was originally intended to be. There was actually a fourth incarnation called Fiend with the Electronic Brain before it was Blood of Ghastly Horror. So, I
did not know that.
That didn't actually get into the story there. But yeah, that was just one where where he didn't really know the market at that point. So he'd made what Sam thought was an effective movie, but one that was not marketable. So they kept on going back, and first of all, they put go-go dancing in it, so they made it Psycho a Go-Go, and that didn't work. So they went back and made it a horror film and threw, a zombie in there and made it into Blood Ghastly Horror.
How about yourself?
I just love when Ken goes, it's like, what is this movie? It's like, I shot it. That's hilarious to me.
Yeah, that's right. I love the color tinting of the old, was it an Indonesian film?
Horror of the Blood Monsters. Oh yeah, that's great. Yeah. So it was called Vampire Men of the Lost Planet, and it was a Filipino movie. And basically it was black and white. So they had to go in and shoot a bunch of new footage, and which was in color, so that it was a contemporary movie. They had a color contemporary movie, and they basically tinted the black and white stuff and got very creative how they explained why it was just tinted one color.
So I consider myself a reasonably a person around Al Adamson, someone who knew a little bit, but I found there was a lot of stuff that I really didn't know. Like, I knew that he had taken over a Western, his first movie, from his father, but in the documentary, it says they basically had a dispute.
Yeah.
But the problem was he could not be an actor. He realized he had to tell everybody what to do.
Yeah.
And I had no idea about the musicals, even though it seems obvious now once you say, oh, his biggest love was musicals and would love to do Seven Brides and Seven Brothers. What was the thing that you found out that you were like, hey, I've been following this guy's career my whole life, but I had no idea about this?
Oh, it has to be the alien stuff. Towards the end.
I had no idea about that. It seems like he would be like one of the last people that I would expect to be someone who would believe in an alien conspiracy.
Yeah. Well, and to take such a deep dive into something, it didn't seem like he got obsessed with any subject that he was tackling. And that's what he did with his with Beyond This Earth, the alien film he was working on when he was murdered. And certainly when the two people we interviewed who knew a lot about it was Sam and Al's girlfriend Stevie. And so when we talked to them, the tone very much changed and on how they were talking. It was no longer these kind of fun stories of daring do making movies. All of a sudden it was like things were getting deeper, things were getting a bit dangerous. They were crossing into territory that maybe they shouldn't be touching upon. And so that got really interesting. And I had no idea that was. I knew Beyond This Earth was a work in progress and still is, but I didn't know that it got all so hairy.
Yeah, I think what was really kind of weird, but also transfixing, was how everybody just stopped dead when they were talking about this, even at the Q&A session. There's a moment in the Q&A session where people start talking about I think you started talking about the aliens, and somebody said, watch what you say.
Yeah.
And it was like, I don't know if they were making fun. I'm assuming they might have been, but in the documentary, the ex-girlfriend, or was it a second wife,
mm-hmm.
Stevie, or girlfriend?
Yeah, she was his, well, there's some debate about that, whether they were actually married or not, but that's another story. But anyway, they were, but she was one of the people who was talking about it, and Sam Sherman. You can see that Sam Sherman is very much in this kind of ballyhoo mode in the rest of the thing. But when he's talking about the aliens, he's very kind of down and depressed. And he knows a lot about aliens, Sam does. So it's kind of his passion. It was his passion project, Beyond This Earth, what's not Al's. Al was just like, okay, I'll do it just because you want me to. But then the more doors he knocked on and the more information he got, the more he got kind of obsessed with it. And even when I was discussing it with Sam after the interview with Stevie, he was like, I can hear it in your voice. This is what happens when people start to get intrigued with this stuff. I can see you're hooked now, and you want to know more, and this is what happens.
Well, I think it was really intriguing because I think, first off, you mentioned that Sam, this was his pet project. Was he a long-standing believer?
Yes.
In
so he had an experience when he was a young man, I think in Arizona, in like a family, at a family home or something like that, in a garden, and he had seen a UFO. So that was kind of the start of his going down this route. And he'd done audio documentaries on UFOs before, so it's something that's been kind of a life work for him. And even now that we've done this and there's been all this new interest in his and Al's work, he's started to float the idea of maybe dusting off all that footage and finishing Beyond This Earth. But it seems like it's a lot of footage, and it's not in any semblance of order at this point.
Well, it was intriguing footage because, I mean, it was just small cuts from, I guess, the rough cuts from what they shot. And I didn't know what it was. And I was going, this is quite strange.
So there was a rough cut done. There was a trailer done, which Sam's made available to us. But there was also a tape that Lupe, the housekeeper, had. It was a VHS tape that she had. It's around here somewhere. That she had because she'd wanted to know, you know, what Al's films were like, and he'd shown her a couple of the films, and she's like, I don't get this at all. These don't look like movies to me. And he said, well, this is the one I'm working on, and this one's going to be special. And he gave her, I think it was like a 20-minute cut assembly of what he had so far. And some of the footage in the doc is from that.
So you mentioned that Al didn't seem to be like the kind of guy who would get obsessed. And yet he finds this person who comes into his life, Fred Fulford, rather fatally and tragically, that seems to have a major obsession with him. And Heather, I think you had to spend a lot of time trying to track this person down and get with him. And I don't want to give away too much of the documentary, right?
Well, tracking him down wasn't the problem. Getting him to communicate.
Right, we know where he was, right? Yeah.
Well, he was in Vacaville, and then he moved to Stockton, and so I was writing him letters from Vacaville to Stockton when they moved him. I petitioned the government of Sacramento to see if we could do an on-camera interview, because you're not allowed to do on-camera interviews of the incarcerated. And just through, again, I bring up Enrique because he was so great. It's like, if I did get the call with him, how do you speak incarcerated? Like, how do you do that? And so he gave me some tips, and it took 2.5 years. I was on the light rail, and I got this call, this 800 number from Texas, and that was Fred
Fulford
calling me on the phone. And that was the first time that he actually reached out, because we were sending letters back and forth, and then he was ready to talk about it.
Yes, he was. And I, of course, will leave that to people to actually be able to see the film. But since it's called The Grisly Death, I don't think we're giving anything away, that there was this murder that had happened. It's actually pretty lurid and disturbing. What was also very interesting or disturbing to me was how it was almost a single white female-ish kind of thing that happens between Fred Fulford and Al Adamson. Mm-hmm. And it really was unsettling. Kind of reminded me of, I can't remember who it was with Bob Crane, but there was the one like-minded person, the only person who understood him. What do you think there was that came up with Fred Fulford? What did he give Al that allowed him to get so ingratiated with him?
Well, I think he owed Al, because he was caught misappropriating funds. So instead of getting rid of him, Al thought, okay, I can use this to my advantage to get cheap labor. And so he moved him to Indio, where he had a ranch that needed fixing up, and the two of them lived there. I mean, they spent a lot of time there together. And to hear Fred tell it, they were good pals, and they would go, they would eat out together and had quite the personal life together. But it obviously soured at some point, because there is plenty of evidence where Al has discussed with other people that he was going to confront Fred again about misappropriating funds. That's where it all went south.
Yeah. I think that's one of the saddest moments with I think it's Gary Kent, who may have been the last person to talk to him on the phone alive. And he's basically saying, this son of a bitch, there's only one problem in my life, and it's this guy. I'm going to talk to him. And I think he also talked to his brother, and his brother said, don't do anything till I get there.
Right.
And of course, what happens is part of what is the great mystery of this film. It's interesting to me because he leaves his quote girlfriend or wife to go be with this guy in the middle of nowhere in Indio, which is like Nightmareville, USA. It's just pure desert. Mm-hmm. And I'm intrigued at why do you think that he took such a weird chance to go with this guy who seemed to be...
Well, I think Stevie and he had a pretty nasty fight, so therefore he was not welcome in his
Vegas kicked house.
Out. Yeah. So I think he had to go to one of his properties, and that was the one that needed the work. So he just made it a project,
You mentioned how Al worked with a lot of directors or actors who were a little bit past their prime, or the phone was no longer ringing. And I think somebody in the documentary says that nobody retires. The business retires you because the phone stops ringing. He seemed to be a precursor to what the Giallo films ended up doing. Anybody who had a alcoholism problem ended up going to Italy and making films there. What movie do you think used these people to the best of their ability, gave them one last breath?
Well, it depends on your perspective, because obviously the most memorable one is Dracula versus Frankenstein with J. Carrol Naish and Lon Chaney Jr., but I wouldn't say that that's anything close to their finest hour. But it's quite the opposite, in fact. I mean, they had all kinds of ailments that they weren't expecting when they hired them, because they just got the headshots of them in their prime, you know.
Chaney had throat cancer.
Yes. And J. Carrol Naish was in a wheelchair and all kinds of other problems. But I think people like Kent Taylor and the Ritz brothers, I mean, they actually got to do what they were known for, you know, and I don't think they came off badly at all, other than the fact that they were incredibly old, whereas people remember them from their prime. But I mean, they made essentially a Ritz brothers comedy with Yvonne De Carlo as well, was in The Blazing Stewardesses. So, you know, I mean, I think they were actually given a chance to actually star and shine, which they haven't done in years. And it may look to the people who knew them in their prime as kind of ridiculous, but they were going for it, you know, and they were being treated with respect.
Don't you feel that there's like a deep sincerity to that? Just like a deep sincerity of making movies at this low budget.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Sam and Al admired these people, Sam in particular. You know, he wanted to work with these people. He wanted to see them do their thing.
And I think that's one of the things that gets missed that your documentary hits, which is, I usually say, I go towards the people who have the most sincere pumpkin patch, you know, and with the great pumpkin. And I think Al Adamson, he wasn't going to spend any extra money on this or that, but at the same point, I think he had a real love for the people that he was working with. He had came off with a bit of joy in these, and I think it shows in the films. And I think your documentary brings that spirit alive.
Yeah, and as you heard Marilyn Joy say in the Q&A afterwards, I mean, she loved Al. You know, nobody else was giving her regular work. She was in other films. You know, she was in the Kentucky Fried Movie, and she was in an Ilsa film and stuff like that. But Al was hiring her regularly, and she really appreciated that. And she was always treated with respect, and actually got to love Al and his wife Regina very much.
I've heard varying numbers of movies that he actually made. I've heard from 30 to 38. Do you have an official tally?
Well, there isn't an official, because so many of them are recuts of already existing movies, which when we do the box set, we want to put as many of the incarnations of it as we can, unless it's just like a title change, you know. But if it was actually something they went back and shot more footage for and re-released as a completely different film, then we want to put both versions on, like we will with Psycho a Go-Go, Fiend with the Electronic Brain, and Blood of Ghastly Horror.
And this brings up where I wanted to go, which is, what's the next step? I heard rumor of a box set. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I think initially the documentary will be released digitally, probably early next year, early 2020. And then not long after that, we'll be doing a box set with as many of Al's films as we can get. I mean, you've seen downstairs here at the Severin office, we have a lot of film cans at the moment. Most of that is Al Adamson movies, which we are scanning and restoring. And it's not been an easy thing to do, because a lot of the elements are, we don't know where they are. I mean, you know, they haven't been those negatives haven't been touched in a long time. So Sam's been doing a lot of detective work in cahoots with a chap called David Shearing and myself, in trying to track down usable elements in order to create a new 2K master. So what we're scanning in 4K, but we're restoring in 2K. But we've pretty much got there on all of the Sam Sherman produced material, and then some of the others like Death Dimension and Black Samurai. You know, we've licensed them from other people. Carnival Magic, Jesse's Girls. So we've managed to get pretty much all of the films. The one that's eluding us at this point is a film called Lash of Lust, which was produced by the same guy who produced The Female Bunch, Marty Rustam. He also produced Eaten Alive, Tobe Hooper's movie, and various other films. And I've been working with him trying to find an element for Lash of Lust. It never came out on tape anywhere, and I think it was only distributed in the US. So there's no archive around the world that might have a copy under a different title, as far as we can tell. As of now, that is a lost movie. It stars Gary Kent and Bambi Allen, and is a nudie western. And we were desperately trying to find this. So I'm working with Marty Rustam. Hopefully we can come up with something, but it's not looking good, unfortunately. Oh. There's only ads to prove that this film ever existed, but they are ads in newspapers of it playing in various drive-ins and things like that. So it definitely was finished.
Well, just when I thought I wouldn't hear anything crazier than there's a full-length documentary about Al Adamson, now I'm hearing 2K restorations of his movies. If someone was brand new to Al Adamson, what movies would you say they just must watch?
I would go for Satan's Sadists as the pinnacle, honestly. I mean, that's a movie where all the elements came together. He had all his core group of actors in there. That's when he first has Regina starring in something, and she's fantastic. He has an incredible soundtrack. You know, he has all the elements of the desert. He loved shooting in the desert. There's Bud Carter's using his plane for stuff. So it's and it's also kind of like a mean, nasty biker movie, and that's really the one that I would direct people towards. But I would also say Dracula vs. Frankenstein, because it's just so much fun, and it is just such an oddball movie and just so enjoyable.
It's got such a great cult following.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's interesting is that, weirdly enough, for Al Adamson not being known by name, Graydon Clark is a director who came out of his stable. You mentioned Bud Cardos. People know Kingdom of the Spiders, if nothing else. And there's just a lot of talent that came out. You mentioned the cinematographers that came through his farm system.
Yeah.
And what would you say was the thing that has most excited you about Al Adamson's work?
The fact that it's just opened the door to this labyrinth of stuff. I mean, I guess I never realized it myself, you know, other than looking at a list of film titles, just how all this stuff came together. Something like Mean Mother, for example, I thought was just a retitling of a foreign film for which he maybe shot one or two scenes. But no, he shot the majority of that movie based off of a film that already existed from another country.
No idea.
Yeah, so there's a lot of that kind of thing. Uncle Tom's Cabin is another one we just got a print downstairs, which is a Kroger Babb distributed exploitation movie, which again he shot a bunch of stuff with Marilyn Joy and made it into his own movie. So all this trying to figure out the archaeology of what these films are that weren't initiated as Al Adamson scripted or Sam Sherman scripted movies. Is fascinating to me. And there's even stuff like a movie called Bedroom Stewardesses, which I don't even have the full movie, but where Sam promises me he can find me the scenes that Al shot, so we can at least include the scenes that Al shot. But it was a German production that they just, you know, shot new stuff for, and they needed another movie with stewardesses in the title, and so that was it.
So you find yourself as a fan, someone who can be easily obsessed?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
What's your next obsession?
Well, it's Bruceploitation is the next documentary that feature documentary that we're doing, because and that's also been going on for about 3 years now. We went over to Hong Kong and South Korea and Taiwan and interviewed the various Bruce clones like Bruce Lee and Dragon Lee and the various makers of these
That's
movies.
Awesome.
And you know, this was something that started because we did a trailer compilation called Kung Fu Trailers of Fury, and one of the guys on the commentary, his area of expertise was Bruceploitation. It wasn't kung fu movies, it was Bruceploitation, specifically a guy by the name of Michael Worth. And I got talking to him, and he's an independent filmmaker himself. And I said, you know, this is something that I was aware of. Like, we're all aware of Bruce Lee and Dragon Lee and Bruce Lee and all these people. But it's like, hang on a minute, how did these guys enter the market? And how did these films do? And how were they exploited overseas? That kind of stuff. And sure enough, then we got a chap by the name of Frank Jiang involved. And he started coordinating efforts over in Hong Kong. And we decided to go over there and shoot it. And so now we've got, I don't know how many Bruceploitation movies that we're restoring as well. Next thing is to edit that. That one is more of a daunting prospect because it's in Cantonese, Mandarin, Japanese, Korean, German, French. It's like so many different languages that we've got on this film that it's going to be quite a task to put it all together. But basically, I'm doing a paper edit at the moment with the translations, and it'll go from there. And then we've also got an Andy Milligan documentary going on at the moment, which Josh Johnson is directing. We had the opportunity to get some Andy Milligan movies, so that's another. He's another fascinating character.
Long Island tour.
Yeah, exactly. So. Yeah, so there's no end.
Is it a defiant act to sort of care about and archive these films so much?
Yeah. Right, and I would say I don't think it's necessarily defiance. I just think it's important to give the treatment to the films that we actually love and were obsessed with, and still are, that they give to their Fellini and Antonioni movies, and I would even go one step further, that in the future we will see that there is actually more first-hand information about these exploitation movies than there is about those Fellinis and Antonionis, because we are so obsessive about getting every single person who went anywhere near the set of these movies to actually talk about them.
It's true. One of the movies that I worked on for Kino, Deep Rising, was up for a Saturn Award, and they literally said it's like, this is like Criterion level. Yeah. To like explore the movie Deep Rising.
Oh, but I would argue that Criterion level is a misnomer, because I don't know that Criterion actually goes as deep in their extras as a lot of the cult labels do. And obviously Criterion is the pinnacle when it comes to presentation of movies, but they're not as obsessive about getting the first-hand information and the critical assessment of these movies as labels like Severin and Vinegar Syndrome, and Shout and Kino and Blue Underground, all those guys.
So do you think that there's a correlation between that obsessive passion and the fact that it gets kind of redheaded stepchild, kind of like with horror? Horror can be up for awards, but once it gets to a certain level, it starts being turned into thrillers and things like that.
Yeah, but going back to how this all started and how my obsession from the VHS era, and a lot of people who collect this stuff grew up in that era as well, is that we're not looking for the mainstream. We're not looking to be a part of the mainstream at all. It's definitely the stuff that is on the outside. And again, doing documentaries about people who work outside the system is way more interesting to me than people who work as part of the studio factory.
Also, the word looking is very fine, because like of our generation, we had to find everything we loved. We had to find the music that we loved. We had to find, like, my Bible was Phantom the Movie Guide, and I used to bring it with me to video stores with my father, like to rent things.
Yeah.
And you had to dig, and you had to search, and you had to become obsessed. And there's a lot of things like...
And you had to be satisfied with third generation, fourth generation copies of movies and music and stuff.
Or even like in Gore Zone magazine, like I would read about a movie, and I would go, I'm going to live my whole life and never be able to see it. I would have to only be happy with the article about the movie.
Right. Yeah.
But now you can get these.
That used to happen for me. It was Danny Peary's.
Yeah. I have all of them. All of them.
And I remember there were movies that I only knew from stills.
Yes.
Until I finally saw them. One being Last House on Dead End Street.
Right.
Classic.
Which was one where, when I got it, I own it. I got the barrel version.
Or even that's Splatter Movies book as well. That's where I first saw
Volume 1 and 2. Mm-hmm.
The pictures of Andy Milligan's movies.
Yeah.
I was like, how can there be a movie called Bloodthirsty Butchers that I haven't heard of?
Right. It's Sweeney Todd. Wait a second.
I always felt that Rob Zombie was influenced by Andy Milligan.
Yeah.
Because of the arguing.
The
endless arguing
and
of unlikable characters.
BDSM level stuff as well.
Yeah, and a lot of people I talked to about those early horror books, like Dennis Gifford's Pictorial History of Horror Movies and Alan Frank's books and stuff like that. Everybody would be looking at the pictures on these, because you only had television at that point and so in your mind you're saying this movie looks fucking amazing, you know what I mean? And then so it was only later when you were really able to track all this stuff down. They wouldn't be showing The Mad Doctor of Blood Island on the BBC back in those days. I just had that picture.
I used to watch WOR TV out of New York, and they would show like The Bell from Hell, but it would be cut.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would for years I only knew those movies from the cut versions.
Yeah.
And when you watch the uncut, it's almost sorted.
Yeah. Well, it's great when you find when you're scanning something and you find that there's something extra in the negative, or they have a reel that they had to cut out, like when we did Prisoner of the Cannibal God at Anchor Bay and found the pig fucking scene. And it's like, oh my God, we can restore this film to how the director intended.
To be a horror fan is to be an archivist, because I know Mike Gingold has his book called Ad Nauseam out, and I told him, it's like, I have binders, like 13-year-old Heather Buckley, like going into the Star Ledger of all the reviews, because I knew how to write about it one day, and somehow this was very important. I don't know why I was drawn at such a young age to go, I needed to keep all this stuff, all the rating on genre.
You'll find, well, that's very true. You'll find that's not uncommon, and that's great, because on what we do, then you'll find that there's all this information and printed paper and things like that people have actually saved over the years. Not necessarily the filmmakers themselves, but there are collectors and archivists who have all this stuff, these resources that you can use on these discs that we produce and these extras.
It's almost like trauma survivors. It's like we all survived the Titanic of our own personal way, and we all have these stories. Water seeks its own level. And I think what's really interesting is when I look at your credits, the movies that are not what we would call horror films or exploitation films are ones that I adore. So The Deer Hunter is in there. What was the one that I saw? Pasolini. You had a thing on Pasolini of all the...
but it was actually about the rip-offs of Pasolini. Because when he did the Decameron, it was very successful. And so in the way that Italian producers do, they all made Black Decameron and Decameron 2 and stuff like that. That featurette was about all the producers who basically made an entire genre out of his Decameron trilogy. But
the focus is someone like Pasolini. That's the attraction. The rules of attraction are very strange for the horror fan.
Well, that's the Kino disc that I worked on with Abel Ferrara and William Dafoe on it. And I told him, it's like, the people who would love to see this are the genre fans, because I see weekly everybody with their Solo t-shirts on. I am an edgelord with my Solo t-shirt. Mm-hmm. And it's like they would be curious and that sort of stuff. There's a broader... So when I used to read Gorzo magazine, my favorite article was With My Eyes Peeled, with Steve Bissett wrote about it. And it talked about a broadening sense of genre. And that's what I knew about, like, Kenneth Anger and avant-garde films. Mm-hmm. And I feel that the genre fans are very open, one, to anything that's subtitled, because then you cannot watch anything that's amazing. But also, like, different sorts of cinema. And then a horror fan would sit down and watch Pasolini because of Ferrara, because it's his last days after Salo.
Yeah. That's very true. Because once you open the door beyond what's just a horror movie, like for me, it was when I was introduced to John Waters, for example. It's like all of a sudden this opened a whole new world of stuff that was interesting and important to me. And I think that's why they call the festivals genre festivals now. They're not just horror festivals. They because they can really encompass anything, as long as it's going to be interesting to a certain type of film viewer.
And the horror genre is so expansive. It continues to, I hate labels, and I really hate subgenre labels, because I think that, when I was growing up, if the punks and the metalheads got along, the world would be completely different. But they didn't. There was always this, well, you're wearing the wrong uniform, you're listening to the wrong chord progression. And so
all my friends were metalheads because I was the only punk, so they adopted me.
Yeah.
They were very nice in Central Jersey like that.
Yeah, that was pretty much it for me when I was in the military in Boston. I have a great story about Waters, because I loved Waters films, and that made me a very odd duck, especially in the military. It's very Spartan as a firefighter. So we were born again hard. We were people who were unshockable. So they would tell me, go to the video store, get us a nasty, since I bring pieces and stuff like that back. And they'd laugh and everything, because that's the thing. You want to watch the nastiest stuff. So I brought Pink Flamingos. I got a whole different reputation by the end of that movie. And it was funny to watch people get up and leave. So what horror is so subjective? To them, that's a horror movie. To me, it's a wonderful fairy tale, probably the most good-natured of all of his films, even though, it's got this craziness.
I used to do exactly the same thing with friends in high school. They'd basically come back from a night on the town and said, right, you've got to watch this, and watch the different reactions.
And I was that person too. Everyone wanted to come over to my house to watch extreme content or crazy stuff.
Yeah.
That's what I was there for.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised. I'll bet that was
Oh yes, I have my whole shelf of like, oh, you want to be emotionally scarred? Here's the shelf.
Here's the Cat 3. Was it Bunny? Was that the I'm trying to remember. There's a movie that was made by a...
You're talking about the Bunny game?
Yeah.
I have that.
Yeah, with the branding, where she actually gets branded. Fascinating film.
Yeah,
but that's
we put
one
that out through a company called Autonomy Pictures.
Really? I've only seen bootleg copies.
David will
Bad
put out
news.
all the filth.
You wouldn't happen to have a copy I can buy
I don't,
here.
unfortunately, because Autonomy was owned by another company, and they stopped distributing it. But I don't even have a copy myself.
Because I absolutely, that's one of those, I tell people that there are different levels of what I can recommend to people. Like that's one I can't recommend unless I know you a little bit and you're somewhat scarred. And I go, okay, you're not going to hate me for giving you this. But it's one of those things that I think we look for when we're going towards films.
Well, film is entertainment, and the idea that people would create anti-entertainment fascinates me.
Yeah.
Something that is an assault, something that is not supposed to be nice, that you're not supposed to enjoy. But it is a part of the narrative of this world. It's not all happiness and sunshine. It is also these horrible, dark places, and we need to look at it. And we need to look at it in ourselves.
I look at horror as a Jungian thing. We're looking at that shadow self. And if you don't have that nice little handshake, sooner or later it's going to fuck you up.
Yep.
You're going to have that madness happen. So I think that most of the time when I go to horror conventions, I'm around some of the happiest people at that moment.
Very much so, yeah.
It's a euphoria that we get from this. Wonderful. And Heather, I know that you were actually producing both the Ranger, which, by the way, if I haven't waxed the car yet on this, I absolutely love the Ranger. But you were also working on this at the same time. Pretty tiring work, to say the least. What's the explosion of work that you're doing right now?
I have discs that I have to get done for Kino Lorber, because I do a lot of the special features for them. And it's just, getting everyone's, all the movies on my slate made. And anytime David asks me for anything, I'm always there for him.
Are you involved with this new foray into madness?
If they need me, I am there, waiting for him in Jersey.
Absolutely. Well, that's wonderful. I want to thank both of you for giving me so much of your time. Is there anything that you'd like to talk about, how people may be able to see the documentary? Is it playing any other film festivals, anything like that?
It is, actually. It's playing in the Brooklyn Horror Film Festival is the next US date.
Brooklyn, but it's what is it? I think it's playing in Boston before it's playing Brooklyn. So
right.
Buffoween is going to play there, and then it's going to be in Brooklyn. I think on the 4th, it's playing in Sitges.
It's playing in Sitges. It's playing the South African Film Festival. It's playing the Night Vision Festival in Helsinki. It's got a lot of festival dates still to come. And I was hoping we might be able to do another LA date because we were way overpacked at our LA screening the other night. There was a few people got turned away, which made me very happy and very sad at the same time. Because
it's always heartbreaking.
Yeah, but then, like I said, it'll be on digital. But the best thing to do is follow Severin Films on social media, and you get all the information there.
Thank you, folks. And once again, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and my Twitter handle is hellbenthorror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.